All right, so hello everyone. We will start in a couple of minutes, well, maybe 1 minute while waiting for the attendees to join the webinar. So my name is Zeynep Kadirbeyoğlu, and I am hosting this webinar as part of Istanbul Policy Center webinar series on Reimagining Cities. Basically today's topic is going to be the design for sustainable urban mobility. First I would like to thank Professor Andres Felipe Valderrama for joining us. He is associate professor in the Department of Sustainability and Planning in Aalborg University. And I also would like to thank IPC, Istanbul Policy Center, for hosting these webinars and for providing the space. This is the second in a webinar series. There will be 4 in total, and these webinars are recorded so that in the future, hopefully, both practitioners and civil society actors and anyone interested in these issues can watch them. As you probably might be following, we are going through difficult times politically in Turkey right now. At the local level, many mayors are being removed. So it seems quite paradoxical to be talking about urban design and sustainability issues, but I think we really have to prepare the ground for better future urban life when hopefully democracy is restored. So for practicalities, we will have a conversation with Professor Valderrama. You can type your questions in the Q&A section. At the end, we will have a Q&A session as well. Having said that, I would like to give the floor to Professor Valderrama, and maybe you can briefly introduce yourself and then provide us with an overview of design for sustainable urban mobility, because urban mobility is also going to be at the heart of our discussion today. And then we'll listen to you, and then we'll have our conversation and then have our questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Zeynep, for the introduction. And hello, everybody. It is a pleasure for me as a Colombian, originally from Colombia, now living in Denmark for the last 19 years, to be invited to your wonderful country, Turkey, which I would like to visit at some point in my life, basically, because I have colleagues that come from your country, which are amazing. And I also have been mistaken. I have been, in many places in Denmark, people start to talk to me in Turkish because they think I'm Turkish. Okay, so I think there's a connection there. I work, as Zeynep said, at the Department of Sustainability and Planning. And working with sustainability cannot be, so hard at sometimes, right? So about 6 years ago, the current Prime Minister of Denmark, she got elected on a platform of, sustainability, which was a lie completely. She has done everything against what she said. So what do we do when sustainability is, just dropping down in the agenda and becoming something that's not really important in front of so many other things that are pressing and urgent and scary? And I hear build on something that a colleague of mine, his name is Alvaro Pinilla, and he works at the World Bank, and he said sometime to me, well, we have to be, instead of being, rational planners, we have to be interactive planners, right? We have to be in touch with the context, what's happening. And in this period, we have to just work on the solutions, on the plans, on the designs, because at some point there's going to be a window of opportunity, and we have to have those ready. We cannot just, wait for the window of opportunity to start working. We have to work now so they are ready when the window of opportunity it's there. So I'm now going to share a short presentation of my take on design for sustainable transitions, which is the topic I've been working on. So I basically am a member of two research groups, Design for Sustainability and Planning for Urban Sustainability at Aalborg University. And what I'm going to present in a moment, it's based on an article which I wrote with two colleagues, Jens UL Stising and Morten Elle, examining some of the dynamics that have been happening in Copenhagen mainly, and building on a couple of research projects we had. So remember when I say transitions are defined as long-term, large-scale systemic transformations. And a lot of the discourse, and there's a whole field of science called sustainable transitions, is about understanding the dynamics of this. Now, design in this field can be thought through this very valuable contribution from Young in 2008. And what he says is that there's always a connection between the context and the component, right? So when you say designing context, when you think of a component, when you think of a vehicle, a bus or a car or a street, a particular street, that design, it's part of a context and it plays in that context. And the context has two levels. It has the system context that can be understood in this case as the city, and the policy context, which is the rules, the stories, the narratives, the wishes of the mayor in cities like my hometown, Bogota, where the mayor has a lot of power, for instance, right? So and there's always, when you do something at the very component level, there's always a world implied in that very specific intervention. And the same when you come up with a policy, which is at a very broad level, you're always implying that that policy is going to require certain components. And the same with the system level, right? I think that a lot of unsustainability happens because there is a mismatch between component, system, and policy. And the most clear example is that cars are designed for racing. Cities are not designed to accommodate cars that can, drive very fast. And the policy sets speed limits, especially low speed limits in cities. So there is a mismatch between the different levels, and that causes unsustainability. So in this particular article, which I can send to you because it's an open source contribution. I mean, nothing can be, if one is doing research in sustainability, it has to be open source. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. So everybody can use it. Every time we do design at the policy, the system, or the component level, there's always a point, there's a position from where that design is coming from. And it's very important to have that clear, right? Many of our cities are shaped by designs that come from car making companies that have no interest in urban mobility, right? But in cities, we see, planners and urban designers that want to make the city a good place for people. So there's always a clash there because there are different positions of design. An additional element is that every critique implies an innovation, and every innovation implies a critique, right? So with this new wave of very big, very powerful, fast electric cars, there's a critique of the city as being an unwelcoming place to bigger, faster, more powerful electric cars. Where you can also say that cities that have been taking space from cars to allow for cycling infrastructure, they're doing a critique and at the same time an innovation. That's the next step. So no innovation is neutral. No innovation is good in itself, because there's always a critique. And again, and all critique coming from sociologists, economists, people that don't engage in innovation actively, they imply innovations, and we have to follow them seriously. And the levels of design, which I just presented. So that's more or less the framework. And I'm going to present 3 examples. So this is one example. This is a rural road. Close to Copenhagen, is not very far, but it's a rural road. The typical design, the normal design is that you have either no marking or just a marking in the middle. So the normal design says this place is only for cars, and the speed limit in rural roads in Denmark is 8 kilometers per hour. That makes it a rural road only for cars, no space for pedestrians, no space for cyclists, and very, very dangerous. So this design has been promoted in Denmark by certain activist environmental organizations that say, we need to have this type of design in order to make the design help awareness and reduce speed limits. So this type of design, what it means is that there's only one lane in both directions, and the space marked outside here, still very narrow, but at least there is something, is for pedestrians and cyclists, right? And if 2 cars come in different directions, they have to really slow down and navigate how to give place to each other and the other users of the road. So this is an intervention at the component level, but it has implications at the system and the policy level, right? So that's one way of looking at it. This is another example, and this is a whole PhD thesis, which is also available, and I can send it to you. It's my colleague, Robert Joseph Martin, who finished his PhD in 2021. And what he did was he took all these interventions that are around in terms of sustainable urban mobility, traffic islands, super blocks, not allowing for through traffic in the middle of cities and all of that. He took all of that and said, how can we make Copenhagen activating all these initiatives that are already out there? And he did 2 things here that are very important. First, the design is for the whole of Copenhagen, including central areas and rural and suburban areas. The second thing he did is like you see in the left, he made an analysis of how things are now and how they could be, right? So in the upper left figure, you see one of the central roads of Copenhagen, 3 lanes of car traffic on each direction. You can see it is built on top of a river. So the river was covered. I don't know if that has happened in some cities in your country, but it certainly has happened in my country, in Colombia. Typical. So you have a nice creek, but you just cover it with asphalt because you need, a place for cars. So on the left side, you see how it is now and how could it be if you remove cars, make active mobility the main form of transportation, with room, of course, also for public transport, buses and emergency vehicles, and resurfacing the river, which is called Legarsån. And the other thing he did that is very interesting is that this type of aerial analysis of urban spaces is just, it's understandable mainly for experts, right? So what he did is, okay, how would that look like from the point of view of a pedestrian walking on the street or a cyclist cycling along the cycle path, okay? So that makes it more inclusive for lay people to also be part of discussing what is the future that we would like, what is the future that is preferable, and not just what is the future that the experts say we should have. And this is a very visual. He's an architect. His PhD thesis was in collaboration with a very progressive Danish architect firm called Yaya Architects. And I can send you the whole thing because it's really one of the most comprehensive designs I've ever seen of a whole city. And finally, then this comes from a project, Morten Elle, my co-author, and I participated. It was called A Coherent Transport System for Greater Copenhagen, 2050. That was the grand name. And in this case, Greater Copenhagen is not a city, it's a region which encompasses the whole of the eastern Denmark and the south of Sweden. So it's one of these huge binational regions currently connected by one bridge physically, but there's a lot of collaboration, and there's an integrated labor market and so on and so forth. When you have a region like that, so the main problem there is not congestion, is mobility poverty, right? So people living in rural areas, they age, or they have accidents, or they have sickness or whatever, and then if the only mode of transport available is car, they become excluded, or they experience a lot of immobility. So you see here in this pie chart, we collaborated with an established transport consultancy firm called Trivector to make a forecast, like a realistic forecast. Realistic in terms that it is possible, right? We can't say that it's desirable from the point of view of politicians and transport experts, but at least they said, okay, yeah, if you want to push it, we can do it, and it would be like this. So instead of have a region that it's very car dominated, as it was in 2019, with the correct policy interventions and designs, it could become a region in which there is a more balanced modal split, right? Which is what you see in 2030, in 2050. Of course, there's regional differences, and we made also the analysis. So the mix for urban areas would be different than the mix for rural areas. But the most important thing we did here, building on a tradition of analyzing public health impacts of active mobility in Denmark, is to ask another consultancy, which is called Incentive, which is very traditional in terms of transport economics, to estimate what would be the benefit in terms of positive health impacts of this type of evolution of the modal split. And you get numbers here, like for 2050, the estimated positive health impacts would be on the of about 11 billion Danish crowns of gain for society, right? And to compare it, the infrastructure plan for the whole of Denmark for the next 15 years is 100 billion, right? So this is a thing that it's comparable, right? It is very positive, and when we are not doing this, we are missing out on that positive effect. It is less for 2030, of course, and you can see they also estimated the benefits in terms of pollution and climate. Everything negative in this table is benefit, right? In terms of pollution and emissions, and the numbers are different for Danish and Sweden, because Sweden estimate those higher than we do. So there's also some opportunity there to make some kind of alignment in terms of estimation. So this is a proposal, a design, a policy intervention proposed from the research point of view, validated through established consultancies, which argues in line with many other research coming from energy planning, research coming from sustainability, that in the future of cities and urban areas and regions, active mobility should play a much higher role than it does today. If we are going to be sustainable, then active mobility should become the backbone of transportation in cities. And what happens is that in cities like Copenhagen, this is not really recognized. It's measured, but it's not in the models yet. And in cities like Bogota in Colombia, it is actually the main mode of transport of the majority of people. It's just not counted because it's the poor people, right? So to finish up, and this is my last slide, so we can start with the Q&A. What you see here is my own vision, and this is something that I've shared with some municipalities in Denmark, and they like it. So in the vertical axis, you have a measure of sustainability. And for me, sustainability has to be concrete. It can't be just, this this loose mentioning of environment and economy and social. No, it has to be something concrete. And the most concrete framework I know is called achieving the SDGs systemically without trade-offs and the Paris Agreement at the same time. And that's a paper published by Jeffrey Sachs and Maria Mazzucato and other people in 2019. That would be a sustainable world, right? So the zero in the vertical axis is not at the bottom, it's in the middle, because what we have now, it's unsustainable by many measures. And in the horizontal axis, you have time. So here, when you see the situation today, we have a mobility system in cities and in countries which is very centered on car mobility, right? It's car that defines what good transport is, even for other transport systems like bus and train. And time is the main metric, right? Time minimization is the main metric of the current urban transportation system. That's why fast cars are good for the system. Bus and trains are less unsustainable, but they are still unsustainable because they require considerable infrastructure, right? Considerable infrastructure. So here in Copenhagen, they have been building this underground metro, which is 20 to 25 meters under the ground in a place that's by the sea. And, you know, just the amount of concrete that is poured into those tunnels, it's something that we're not going to be able to account for in the next 200 years. There's cycling and walking, but they are very small. So the main transportation system we have now, which favors higher speeds, is unsustainable. In the future, we propose that a transportation system would not be focused on time minimization. It would be focused on health improvement. So imagine a city that says, okay, we're going to take decisions so people can move around and at the same time become healthier, right? In that system, walking and cycling would be central. There would be public transport, of course, there still be, but to complement the main system. There will be small light electric vehicles to complement the main system. And there would be some kind of assisted vehicles also to complement. But they would be as small and as light as possible to complement what we cannot do by walking or cycling. To get there, then we have to engage into things that we already know and that many cities are doing. So reducing speeds. Copenhagen, not a good case, but you can go and see what's happening in Paris and Madrid. In other cities, they are saying, yeah, we have to go, you know, the speeds that are compatible with urban life are below 30 kilometers per hour, 20 kilometers per hour. Mobility as a system and transit-oriented design, there's some of that in Copenhagen and Denmark, which is exemplary. I would say, but nobody listens, but I would say that stop highway expansion, okay? We have enough highways in Europe. The problem is that we're using cars that are way too big with lower occupancy, right? So instead of building more, which is unsustainable by all accounts, we should be taking decisions that make better use of what we have. We should stop using fossil fuels for transport, and we should, you know, tax emissions. And we should engage in radical EV design. The EV design we have been seeing until now, it's very conventional. I mean, somebody have to tell you that this is an EV for you to notice that it's an EV, but otherwise it just resembles a normal SUV, right? So mainly coming from China and India, we are now seeing more and more small vehicles that are really, you know, appropriate for the purpose they are doing, right? So just as an example, here in Denmark, there's an increasing number of service companies like cleaning companies or health companies that have these really small EVs that they use to go from house to house to deliver their service. And that is what I had to tell you. So I'll look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much. This was I think it sort of set scene for what's to come. So I will be turning to the questions in a minute. I just wanted to ask you maybe also what you think about how policymakers and urban planners can collaborate more effectively to bring about these transitions. Because obviously, I mean, civil society actors on the one hand demanding certain things, politicians on the other hand promising certain things, as you said, in Copenhagen or in Denmark in general as well. You have certain election promises which may not necessarily come to life. What we see at the local level, though, I in most places, I think, is that because of the proximity to the population, they tend to be mayors or elected local authorities tend to be more responsive to local demands. Sometimes these can create clashes as well. I mean, when you remove a lane, car owners or shop owners may actually sort of raise their voices, but then, you know, there may be more not to say clever, but more innovative, more effective ways of redesigning or designing urban space and mobility that may actually open up for better future alternatives to the whole of the population, not just the vocal small groups that want to protect their interests, maybe. So I just wanted to get your sense of like, you know, maybe through some good examples that you said, Paris, Madrid are sort of, you know, taking these to a different level, whereas maybe Copenhagen or let's say Hamburg, where I have also been for research, were not as at ease in moving ahead. So just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, in terms of integrated solutions, the places are cities, right? Because here the main challenge is that cities, the main challenge is that countries, national governments, the silos, right? Mobility, health, education are more separated at the national level because they are thinking a whole territory that's very diverse, right? So when you're sitting in the Ministry of Transport, of course, for you, what you see is how do I connect people that live in different parts of the country? And then for you, it becomes like a natural thing to think car infrastructure. While cities, they see the opposite problem, right? They see car infrastructure interfering with good city life, with access to education, creating accidents and health problems and all of that. But it is the national government that has the upper hand in most of transport policy. And that is a problem. So one thing that is very important for urban planners is to think, how can we influence the national level, right? Because without that, it's very difficult. They are the ones that set national speed limits. They are the ones that set the specific minimum sizes of roads and even neighborhood streets, right? So it is important to find a way to influence them. So one positive example from Denmark is that Denmark has been at the forefront since the 1950s in terms of central city pedestrian streets, right? They are, of course, not thought of as transport solutions. They are thought of this, you know, attractive touristic place for shopping and business and whatever. But it's something that many other cities and small towns have replicated, okay? Because they see that it has a value in terms of commerce, in a value in terms of attracting customers to the city center and so on and so forth. So that's one thing, and that is positive. This is a whole other lecture, but in Colombia, they developed in 1999 the first bus rapid transit system, which was a whole systemic innovation. I wrote my PhD thesis about that, and we could have a whole lecture about that. But one part of that episode was very important, how the mayor, which in Colombia is the mayor of Bogota, which is the capital, is basically the second most powerful person in the country. How he had the possibility and used that to influence the national level, right? So he did a strategic move in order to change the metros. It was called the Metro Law, which said that the nation would fund half of every metro project in any city, and he changed it for a BRT law. So it became a law in which the nation would fund any metro or bus rapid transit system, and that's how he got the funding to do it, or a good part of the funding. So one important part is when we're doing our, as urban designers or activists, when we're thinking about our local solution, we have to think, okay, what does this need from the policy level, and how can we argue for it? Okay, because otherwise it just becomes, a weak local solution and not something that has a wider impact. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And what about what are some of the best sort of ways to engage communities in co-designing urban mobility? Like you said, especially in the thesis that you talked about, there's both the aerial view, which is designed mostly for expert use, but at the same time, we could sort of have a better understanding of what it would look like as pedestrians or as cyclists from the street view perspective. So these are maybe methods to sort of engage in alternative future scenarios, the views of local residents or people who use the city, even if they're not dwellers, that they're just moving in for work and moving out. There are tons of different alternatives. So what are ways of engaging communities in co-designing sustainable cities or the cities of the future, let's say?
Yeah, well, I would say two things. The first one is to engage them openly, to think about the solutions, right? Because one of the main problems is that civil servants, urbans, and sometimes also activist groups, they approach communities because they already have an idea. They don't approach communities to ask, what should we do? Of course, there's the problem of funding or whatever, but I would say, there's a whole literature on citizen involvement and the ladder of involvement, right? From just, contacting people just to get their okay so we can go through our project, to really engaging with them. And I think we should engage, and these are the moments to try to do that, right? Because there are people want to think about the future, people want to have an influence, but they would like to be there from the beginning, right? So that was one thing I would recommend. Maybe some activist groups can take that role, or with the support of the city, or the other way around, because there are things going around which are worth considering and bringing into play. The other thing is that there are always plans. People are not just sitting there. So I showed you this aerial view of a road that is covered with asphalt. The neighbors of that road have already a plan to recover the river. Okay, they are not thinking in the rest of Copenhagen. They are thinking, okay, how do we get rid of this ugly road and make and recover our river back? But that has synergy with what Robert did, right? So there's also this task of creating synergy with the ideas that are around, because we are not working from scratch. There's always a number of ideas. So one thing, for example, that could be done, and it happened in Bogota. In Bogota, there are very different cycle collectives, right? So there are ones that are focused on, the right of women to enjoy the city without being afraid. And they do this organized evening cycle tours in groups throughout the city. There are others that are engaged in really saying, they're anti-car, and that's their main fight, and so on and so forth. But they have actually gathered together and said, okay, we have different things, we should not be the same, but at least can we agree on a couple of things we fight for together? So there's also that, respecting difference, but joining forces in some aspects where they can collaborate and and push and have a stronger voice.
Yeah. And in Bogota, would you say that like what have been the impact of the cycling organizations, let's say, in redesigning the urban space?
It has been incredible. It has been really important because they have been, making specific proposals of long routes, long cycle paths that take space from cars for years and years. And when COVID came, the designs were ready. So the city just implemented, and now they are permanent.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's very good.
That tells to this idea of the interactive designer, right? So not wait for the opportunity to start designing, make the design, have it ready, and when the opportunity happens, then it's about implementing.
Okay. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. One final question that I have, then I will turn to the question and answer session. I would like to remind maybe those who joined us late that if you can type your questions in the Q&A box, we will go through them one by one. It's not possible to speak by raising hand because I have seen a hand before, so I just wanted to remind you of that. So what I wanted to ask is also about the issue of equity and inclusivity. I realized in the future design that you showed in your last slide, you have small sort of components that are going to complement the walk and cycle sort of main sort of mode, I guess. But in general, when we think about transitions, especially with respect to urban mobility, what are the main concerns for making it more equitable and more just in the future for the whole of the population, not just a small not just some groups, let's say.
Yeah. So there are two things. One about gender and the other about, let's say, income groups. So the one about gender, which has been extensively researched in Sweden, especially also in Denmark, points at two things. One is that the main the main designers and decision makers in transport at all levels are men. Right. So there's a lack of inclusivity in the way transport and is planned, right? This is not the case for urban development, which is less bad. I wouldn't say completely inclusive, but it's less bad. But there's a work to be done there, right? So we have to ask for more women in transport planning. And the other one is about social inclusion, right? So especially in Bogota, also slightly in Copenhagen. So the way we do transport planning, the tools we have to do transport planning and economic evaluation of those plans are they privilege the present, right? And when you privilege the present, any investment is going to be a better investment for society if it's already in a well-off neighborhood. So there's many researchers, but especially Martens in the Netherlands, who says maybe we should, instead of using this typical CBA approach in which you actually use the present to see the future, to use an accessibility gains approach. And that would change completely the picture, because then investing €1 in poor neighborhoods gives more gains in terms of accessibility than investing €1 in well-off neighborhoods that are already accessibly rich, right?
Yeah. Okay, thank
But
you.
it means changing the way the decision support tools we use, and that, I mean, we're doing that from research, but it
needs to,
it's a fight.
Yeah. Okay. So let me now move to Ekin Alpagut's question. The main problem is car owners born as the streets belong to cars, and they think these kinds of city changes touch their driving freedom. and to be on the streets. So the big problem is first to make the society understand the car existence is not a normal way of life, and that change can happen. What do you think?
Yes.
Where to start to make people understand this new approach? How are they going to be convinced? How can we convince them?
Yes. And there are many things that have to be done, because it is true, car owners have a good service. There are very cities and these courses in general, ministries of transport take good care of car owners. And that means that they have a lot of privileges that we have to take away, not because because they interfere with other values, right? So things that are happening. So I just mentioned in Bogota, taking away car lanes to give it to cyclists, it just improves the transport, right? So improves the capacity of a corridor, because then when you measure it, how many people is this corridor moving? It's just bigger, because with one lane for cyclists, you move a lot more people than with 3 lanes for cars. In Copenhagen, there is this very gradual approach, because this is a very political issue, but they do take car parking away from the city streets, right? And in Bogota, they have started charging, right? So they have this gradual approach to saying, okay, Mr. Car owner, you have been riding free in this number of things. We are starting, but then they give something in return, like this is going to be invested, this is going to be improved, this is going to whatever. And then there's evidence, right? That there is research evidence. So I showed you a road in Copenhagen, 3 lanes in each direction. And people always say that, when you have roads, big roads, that's good for commerce. But the commerce in that road is very poor, right? And there's a parallel road, not 100 meters away from that. In that road, there was an intervention that was very famous, because they restricted through car traffic and prioritized public transport and cycling. There's where you have the widest cycle lanes I've ever seen, like 3.5 meters. And commerce just exploded there. I mean, all sorts of things, from shops, supermarkets, cafes, clothing, apparel, even furniture and things like that. Because when you buy nowadays furniture, you can go to a shop, see what you want, and then ask for it to be delivered. Right? So and that's been documented everywhere, right? And the third thing is storytelling. Especially that word freedom has to be taken back. And I have this anecdote which really comes through, I have seen come through many people and say, my daughters, they grew up here in Copenhagen, and they had freedom since they were 10 years old, right? So more or less the age where children can cycle alone in this city is 10 years old, because there's such a wonderful biking infrastructure. So from 10 years old, my daughters were free to go to school and back to visit their friends. And I could be at work without worrying that I had to come and collect them. Meanwhile, my friend Juan Carlos Lucena, who lives in Denver, Colorado, which is a car-based city, he was taxiing his kids until they were able to drive themselves, right? So when I say he had no freedom, I had freedom. My daughters had freedom. So we have to take back that word, because it doesn't belong to car. There's a different meaning there, but it's not. The story, the real freedom is the freedom of being able to enjoy the city, and not fear of dying because you just want to move somewhere. Yeah.
Okay. And then Pelinos has a question. What are the key challenges that Copenhagen would face in prioritizing cycling and walking in its urban planning, and how can the city address them? For example, prioritizing cycling and walking may not be as practical for people who need to travel longer distances or who do not live near a well-connected transport hub. Would or can the vulnerable groups have access to mobility? Would the strategy of putting health at the center be inclusive enough for different parts of society?
So the main challenge right now is that the city is still using car-based traffic models and economic evaluation systems. still. So in Copenhagen, during the last 15 years, the city is one of the best examples of a city that has a good cycling infrastructure, but still car ownership is growing, okay? Because the country as a whole is making more effort to promote car transport. And the city alone cannot counterbalance that on its own, right? They have also made some decisions which are very not inclusive, right? So the metro, as I told you, they have doing this metro, which it has two problems from my point of view, on top of being a very CO2 intensive infrastructure. One is that it's completely automatic, right? So there's nobody you can. So if you're an old person or a person with difficulty mobility, you don't have anybody to ask for help, right? And the other one is that the stations are very close to each other. So in reality, what they are taking away is active mobility trips, right? So that's not the way of doing it. I think that and this happens because what they measure mostly is, this investment in terms of time minimization. If they, and that's the main thing they do. They also have a cycling account. They also have a walking account, but that's outside the traffic models. Okay, so they are still optimizing mechanized transport in Copenhagen. But there are different departments. So the mobility department, the walking department, the cycling department, and they have an internal fight in the municipality. Actually, I'm colleagues with some of the ones working in cycling and pedestrian, and they do have this guerrilla approach in which they bomb the meetings of the others to make sure that they don't take decisions that are in contradiction to what they are of the promotion of active mobility. I would definitely say that a health-centered mobility system would take better care of people that have issues with health, right? And just to give you an example of how that happens, the majority of cities take decisions on how to improve traffic to facilitate commuting. That is, home to work, work to home, home to study, study to home. And that's why we have these, train lines that concentrate the transport in the center, and these highways that also do that. Though that way of designing is at the service of the main income in the house, which still in Denmark is the man, right? While all the care trips, taking the kids to school, taking your mother to the hospital, that's normally done by women. And those trips are not optimized. Okay? So if health is the main issue, then all those trips would be optimized. Then combination trips, that is a thing in Denmark. Combination trips in which you take the train or the bus, and then in the bus stop you have access to a bike share system that can help you get the last mile. Then that would be more salient. But currently we still live in Denmark, which is regarded as an example, but we're still in a paradigm of car-centered mobility.
Thank you. So we have Johanna Vicha. She is from Agora Transport Transition in Berlin. And the question is regarding radical EV design. What could be effective approaches to support a shift towards smaller and more efficient electric vehicles? For example, in terms of regulatory policies, pricing instruments, or other alternative strategies. In Germany, the car industry claims to be responding to market demand, which is why they currently focus on producing large EVs.
Yeah. My only hope, I don't know, Johanna, that's a very difficult question, but my only hope is that in historical transitions, right, when we went from horse carriages to automobiles, there was a peak in horse transport about 10 years after the car was invented, after the car was adopted like widely, right? So from that historical example, which is not a sustainable transition, it's an unsustainable transition. But in innovation studies, it's more or less established that the old technology has the better life just, after the better alternative has been introduced, right? So Nokia was great 3 years after the first Apple telephone was introduced, and then it died completely. So I hope that the German and French and Spanish car industry realize what the Indian and the Chinese car industry is already realizing, that the future is not large EVs, but smaller EVs, right? Smaller EVs that are more appropriate, that drive at lower speeds to what we actually have. Because in Europe as a whole, in the entire subcontinent, the 80% of trips are 10 kilometers or less in the whole continent. So it's not necessary to have these big cars. But the problem is that, especially Germany here is the big driver of how cars are designed and into our purpose. So they have these highways which have no speed limit, which is the only reason you have cars that can drive above 130 kilometers per hour, because in the rest of the continent, you can't do that. But because they do it there, and you ask people in Denmark, but why do you need a car that can drive more than 130 kilometers per hour? Because when I go to Germany, and they go to Germany, once a week, once every 10 years, right? So that's one thing. Maybe the current economic situation is going to force their hand, but I think that the future is going to be smaller EVs. But yeah, I agree that it doesn't look good right now.
Okay. We have Mana Yusuf, who has a question that says, can current already existing cars be retrofitted for EV capability, and what sort of energy needs would that entail? Policy change, what policy change would needed to prevail upon people to give up the investment that they've made in their expensive cars? So in a way, like this car-centric idea of having these big cars, can we actually retrofit them is the question, I guess.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, cars are designed for 15 years, right? So maybe new EVs, which require less maintenance, they would last for 20 years. But I mean, cars are not forever, right? So retrofitting for me is, what decisions do we have to take now that are going to make our societies much better in 20 years? So one, it's already in Europe. So in 2035, no more car combustion cars can be sold. Right. So that I think we should also start moving into policies that require taxes for weight, taxes for size, taxes for power, right? And maybe I would say, as city planners and activist groups, we should be demanding that cars have speed limits incorporated. I mean, we don't need cars in the majority of the world. We don't need cars that can travel at higher speeds. We need cars that can travel slow, right?
Yeah. And then Esra Çetin has a question about, or three questions actually. There's the Green City Awards. What impact could these have? What would you say on that? Then what is the most important and most dangerous thing to do while this transition is taking place? I guess maybe as a planner or I don't know. And then there's also a question about the elderly people and their role in this picture of the transition of urban mobility.
Yeah. So I don't know much about city awards, so I can't say anything about that question. The most important thing is to collaborate, right? So we need coalitions, and cities, the C40 coalition, for instance, is one of these big collaboration among cities, because cities have more clear what should be done in terms of sustainable urban mobility than countries. Right? And elderly persons should become part of this. I mean, just think about that. The majority of car designs are elderly persons unfriendly. I mean, even even to take my mother to the hospital, it is a real effort to her to get into the car and out. Right? So I would say a sustainable future has more better designs that can help people move around, people
More
with
easily.
limited mobility or disability or yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And I'd say Tilken has a question as to whether the demand for urban sustainability transitions is coming from the bottom, or like the voters, the activists or whatnot, or from the top, the politicians at the top. What would you say? Like in the examples, let's say in Paris, for instance, which we saw as a good example. Like where, like how does it work? I think in a way that the answer is both ways, but
Yes,
what would you
yes.
say about that?
Now that there's always politics both ways. Now, car manufacturing companies have been very powerful companies in all countries. So they do have influence in policy, and because they own a number of politicians, and some of them they just sell themselves cheap, right? You give a nice car to a politician, and he becomes your spokesperson.
Walter.
But there are increasing number of, and the newer generations are going to produce more city politicians and country politicians that really look into sustainability and the environment. So that's going to influence. And again, this is a matter of collaborating. I mean, thank you for this invitation. This is part of this collaboration. We also have a master class on the bikeable city, where we train 20 to 25 planners from all over the world every year. So there are a number of things that are happening that are going in the right direction.
Yeah, and also I just wanted to mention, like, there are also sometimes unintended consequences of certain policies. For instance, when I was in Hamburg, I realized that this Deutschland ticket, which I don't know if we are familiar with it, which came about as a kind of, I mean, what it brought about is that you are now able to travel to any city in Germany with this Deutschland ticket. Except for the fast trains, you can get on the regional trains and whatnot. And then once you're in that city, you can actually easily use the same card to use all the public transport system in that city. So it applies to all the cities, and it gives you ability to go to another place, and without having to think about how to get a card or how to move around, you are able. So then it allows people to actually be more mobile, and then also it promotes leaving your car behind and going without your car. So I think these kinds of, like, there could be demand, like, of course there was popular demand asking for Deutschland ticket to continue to exist because it was given as a favor for a short period when gas prices were increasing. But then there was demand coming from the bottom that actually made it into a policy that could now be sustainable for the future, hopefully. And that has made a huge impact, as far as I could see, in both urban mobility, but also intercity mobility in Germany, which, as we said, is, as you know, car-centric design is at its heyday, but still it's a way of introducing things that may actually open up spaces for then enlarging those spaces in the future, in collaboration with civil society actors, with local governments and the national level politicians. So I think we have come to the end of the questions. I have many questions, but I don't want to take more of your time. We have already reached our 1 hour limit, but those who are interested in the open access work that Professor Valderrama talked about, they can search for them online, or they can always email me or him, and then we can share them. And definitely we are hoping for more bike and pedestrian friendly city designs for the future that will bring about both urban sustainability but also better health and better environment for everyone. Thank you very much, Professor Valderrama, for joining us. Thank you very much for all the participants for being here. And our next webinar, the third one in the series, will be in a month time. I will be making the announcements shortly. So have a good week. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Zeynep, for the invitation. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.